What's going on, my people? This is your host, Blanche Eden for Black Trending News. This is episode 36 today, and we're going to be talking about colorism, which is a really popular topic in the Black culture. But what I want to do is take it back a little bit. I felt really good about the podcast that I did connecting slavery with abuse and going into depth about giving examples how, Master taught Black people how to abuse each other and abuse women as far as domestic abuse, parental abuse, child abuse. So check that out. It's a really good podcast. So today I'm going to be connecting colorism from the past with colorism now. And nothing has changed, to be honest with you. And again, I don't know why I'm so fascinated with history and how it just lines up with today. So let's get into it. Studies show lighter skinned Black people are at an advantage on a number of social indicators, and it's called colorism. It's just like racism, except it's between the same race. In this case, we're talking about Black people or African Americans. These studies generally contend preferences for light-skinned and or mulatto slaves endured the postbellum period to shape social outcomes into today. Other studies examine differences in social outcomes between mulattoes and Blacks in the 19th century. But few connect antebellum life to postbellum mulatto Black stratification. So that's what I want to talk about today. So I want to give a little bit of background on chattel slavery in the U.S. It was a fundamentally racialized institution that previous research shows continued to shape racial inequality even after the emancipation period. But slavery was more than an institution of interracial boundaries, creating and exacerbating racial inequality between Blacks and whites. It also shaped interracial boundaries among Black people, hence the term colorism or shadeism. It not only determined who and who was not Black, but also contributed to skill differences that molded occupational success post-emancipation. Historians and social scientists credit chattel slavery with creating a system of light skin preference through slave owners' fondness for mixed mulatto slaves. They generally argue that system of light skin preference persisted through the eventual codification and institutionalization of the one-drop rule into the modern system of colorism or skin tone stratification among Black Americans. Research has showed that lighter-skinned Black Americans outperform their darker-skinned counterparts in income, education, health. They receive shorter prison sentences and are perceived as more attractive. However, although some researchers have examined colorism extending back to the 19th century, even during chattel slavery, we have yet to verify the claim that colorism was initiated by slavery by directly connecting slavery to skin tone stratification post-emancipation. So, basically what that is saying is that people have done research and they see, yes, this happened a lot during slavery, but they're not necessarily blaming slave masters or slavery, the event of slavery, for colorism. Because there's other nations that do this. For example, Asia has colorism based on your class. So usually if you were darker skinned in Asia, you were a lower class. Same thing in India. So colorism did not start during slavery, but it does affect the Black community today because it happened in the Black community at that time. So, there's a connection with that. Now, colorism is a system of practices and ideologies that privileges lighter-skinned Black people with facial features typically associated with Europeans over their dark-skinned counterparts with more African-associated facial features. Research consistently shows the effects of contemporary colorism are far-reaching. The higher wages, more education, better health outcomes, shorter prison sentences, being more attractive, those type of things they consider to outperform darker-skinned Blacks. Although scholars have become quite adept at describing the extent of colorism, few manage to effectively describe the mechanisms that facilitate colorism and break this trend when they presented the preference for whiteness thesis. In this thesis, they use a combination of social psychology and anthropology to explain the perpetuation of color stratification, or colorism, or shadism. In short, they argue humans cognitively categorize the social world into groups and outgroups they use to organize their behavior. Generally, people prefer in-group members over out-group members and offer preferential treatment to the former while shunning the latter, or the darker-skinned Black person in this case. When these patterns of differential treatment are mapped onto groups with different levels of social power, such as racial groups, they can result in widespread social inequality, which we know they have for 400 years now, at least in the US. People use visual cues to classify others into racial in-groups and out-groups with certain physical characteristics, primarily skin tone, but also hair, eyes, lips, and noses. Identifying a person as white and others as Black, governing how they are treated. However, people do not racially classify others into a strict dichotomy using these visual cues. Instead, people receive social favor in proportion to their position on a sliding scale of visible Blackness. The more white, less Black a person looks, such as lighter skinned, thinner noses, thinner lips, and straighter hair, the more white in-group benefits they receive, lifting their social position above other Blacker counterparts. Now, Black people are forced to acknowledge the supposed superiority of a group higher on the social hierarchy. White people, they also offer them preferential treatment, explaining why Black people also tend to favor lighter-skinned people. That is the colorism that we're discussing today. Go ahead and leave a comment. I'm not done yet, but go ahead and leave a comment. Tell me what you think so far. Do you have any experiences with colorism? I think everybody has, whether we're light or dark. Personally, I'm a lighter skinned person and I still experience racism from Blacks, from whites. Honestly, I don't see myself getting treated better than other Black people. I just haven't really experienced that. But I wouldn't say that I kind of breezed through life because I was light skinned. I would never say that because it's not true. So what they tried to do back then was look at a person and determine, I guess they didn't have the technology to determine how Black somebody was. They may not have had the technology that we have today to determine the percentage of how Black somebody is. So what they would do is look at their features and determine how Black a person was. For example, they would say things like this. This took place in an Alabama courtroom. It was a witness testimony. Quote, Susan is of very light complexion, has straight hair, is slightly swarthy, and has rather thick lips and coarse features. From her appearance, I'm of the opinion that she has a small amount of African blood in her veins, not more than an 1/8 or a 1/16. Her mouth and features generally indicate the African blood. To me, that sounds pretty ignorant to be scrutinizing somebody's features so intensely what does it matter? I think that's just straight up racist. And, these type of behaviors, like, people do it unconsciously, like today and forever. Like, I could even remember in high school, there was a particular girl who was very, very fair skinned. They would call her maybe like marshmallow colored, but she was very, very fair skinned. And she was like captain on the booster squad. I mean, she was like the leader. She was popular. She was, she was adored. And I have to say it was because she was lighter than all of us. And everybody knew it. Like it's like I could just speak for myself, but when I say everybody, I meant, the other darker girls, my complexion and darker or whatever. We just knew that was why, like, oh, she's light skinned, that's why people treat her like that. But we never said anything. We just lived, like we just we just went to school. It was never a topic of discussion like it is today, like 2019. People will straight up and be like, well, people are doing that because she's light skinned. It's all over the internet. Oh, such and such is light skinned, that's why she's getting away with it. That's why that person's getting away with it. If that was a black person, they wouldn't be able to get away with it. That type of treatment. So it's definitely very effective, and it's very much happening. I just feel like when I was in high school, it just wasn't spoken about. We never spoke about it. It was just like we saw it, we knew it inside, but we never addressed it. It was just something we saw. We just kind of like accepted it and moved on, and was like, that's just what it is, and I just knew that I wasn't like that. I didn't treat her different, but we could see how other people treated her. They might have felt intimidated by her or insecure around her because of, how she looked. She wasn't any prettier than anybody else. It was just, I believe, her complexion and I think that, and we've all heard this as black people, right? Oh, she's been treated like that her whole life, that's why she's like that. Like, they say that about a very fair-skinned black girl. Oh, that's why she's like that, because everybody treats her like she's better, so she acts like she's better. And that could have a lot to do with it. And I think that might have had something to do with it. She had this attitude like, I'm the shit. And people treated her like that because that was her attitude. So, moving along from my story time, back to the article here from Sage Journals. So these people at the time had this type of confidence that they could determine somebody's racial heritage based on their features. This is evident in how light-skinned African Americans have been shown to change from black to mulatto or mulatto to black based on their occupational mobility patterns as well. Although the importance of different classifications for mulattoes and blacks decreased as the Jim Crow one-drop rule began to gain traction across the country, legally and socially, making millions of mulattoes black, the skin color stratification that had already been established through phenotypical differences in the two groups persisted. So even though mulattoes were classified as black because we have black features, but we also have different black features. They're not as prominent. Our lips may not be as full. Our skin may not be as dark, but we may have hair like, Afro kinky hair. Just these differences, they started to categorize us as black. If you had a little bit of black, you're black, basically. And I'm good. Like, I don't, again, I'm just discussing this. I'm very happy being black. It doesn't bother me to be black. I love being black. But at the time, it pushed, I guess, mulattoes in the black category, segregating again, removing that middle mulatto color and just making you black. But it's still, colorism was not going to go away. I mean, you can't treat black people like that for all this time and then expect them to wake up one day and go, oh, how you doing, sis? Even though you're lighter than me and were treated better than me for 100 plus years, now you're my best friend. It just doesn't work like that, So Colorism still exists to this day. Just one of my experiences, like I went to a Burger King drive-thru and I pulled up to the window and there was a darker skinned girl in the window. And I don't know, maybe, at the time I felt like she just was really nasty to me for no reason. I don't know. And I just thought in my head, and I'm using this story as an example because it just shows how deep colorism is. She could have been mad about her boss, could have been yelling at her. She could have been running late. She maybe wants to go home. She could have been mad about anything. But colorism is so deep that when I saw that she was mad at me, I thought it was because of the color of my skin. That's how deep colorism is. Nobody has to necessarily tell you to your face, I don't like you because you're light skinned. You could just get a feeling. And whether that feeling is true or not, your perception of that feeling is truth. I felt like she was treating me like that because of the color of my skin. I could have been very wrong, but that's how deep colorism is. It is just in our heads, and we just might be like, damn, that could be it. It just kind of felt like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just in the back of your mind. Like, why is she treating me like that? I can't think of any other reason but the color of my skin. Because I'm lighter than her. Like, but she could have been mad about anything. So I'm just, again, that's what I first went to. But after thinking about it, I was like, well, she could have been mad about anything. But the go-to thought, the automatic thought was because I was light skinned. And that's just from life and like growing up and dealing with colorism at work and just in the supermarket or wherever you go. You get looks, you get, even there's a lot of pictures of me online. I got to go through shit like that online and people being mean or whatever. So, or very nice. They could be very mean and they could be very nice. And you don't know why people are being very nice. You know what I mean? Are they being nice because of how you look? Or are they being nice because they're nice people? So people will treat you differently based on how you look and their preference and what they like, what they find attractive and so forth. Now, the differences in mulattoes and blacks during the antebellum years were not an accident. They were set core ideas that white people started between black people. Mulattoes were bolstered through preferential treatment from white people because of their presumed white blood. White people generally perceived mulattoes as smarter, more attractive, more industrious, and less deviant than blacks. In some cases, white people even perceived mulattoes as more closely allied with white people than their black counterparts, as evident in a legislative report on a planned slave revolt in the early 1820s. It says here, free mulattoes are a barrier between our own color and that of the black, and in cases of insurrection are more likely to enlist themselves under the banners of the whites. Most of them are industrious, sober, hardworking mechanics who have large families and considerable property, and so far as we are acquainted with their temper and dispositions of their feelings, abhor the idea of association with the blacks in any enterprise. Wow. So again, not shocking, but it's very possible that white people feel less threatened by lighter skinned people because they're closer to what they look like. I could see it. I could definitely see it. Even personally speaking, like, no, I'm not going to say that. There was one time, though, I'm not going to say where I was, but I will say that I was in a predominantly white party. I'll just call it a party, a gathering. That's where I was at. And I've never been to this party before, and I was by myself. So when I went to the party, white people flocked to me. It was crazy. I mean, a bunch of white people were talking to me. I was like, wow, okay, cool, whatever. There's mostly white people here. There were black people there, but maybe I want to say the ratio was like 6 black people and like 40 white people, so it was very uneven. And me being one of them. And I was speaking to this white woman for like probably an hour, just having conversations. And I noticed that when I went to speak to my black counterparts, I'll never forget this look that one of the white ladies that was speaking to me. There were a few that I was just introducing themselves and speaking to me and engaging in conversation. And I'll never forget the way this white lady turned around and looked at me when she saw me talking to a black male. She gave me the most nastiest look. And I just remember going, oh my God, wow, it's really, really like that. See, I don't go to parties and stuff like that very often. And that's why I won't even say where I was. I will just leave that out. But because I was grateful for the opportunity, but it just wasn't for me. And that had a lot to do with it. And I saw right there that her look, and this time it was not in my head like at the Burger King incident. This was different because it wasn't just pulling up in a drive-thru. This was an ongoing, I was there for a few hours. So this was very much what I saw in her face. Basically, her face was like, you are a fucking cut off nigga and don't speak to me again. Basically, that's what her face said. Because she had gave me this look like, why are you talking to black people? Why are you talking to them? That's what her face said. Literally, and you know what I'm talking about. Somebody can give you a look and it could be a fucking story. That look tells all. The look tells all. So I definitely understand that threatening feeling that white people might have when they think that you are like the way I speak, or, you know, I didn't really grow up in the hood. I kind of grew up in the hood, but not really in the hood. And I have the ability, I could be hood or I could be more sophisticated, you know. So I think that when sometimes white people see sophisticated and you speak amongst them, that you can't hang out with black people or something. And I wasn't feeling that shit, you know. So I knew right then and there that place and that opportunity wasn't for me. And I continued to hang out with who I wanted to hang out with because that's who I am. I'm not racist, and I'm not going to be like, oh, you know, you're going to give me a nasty look, so let me move from these black people. I'm not going to fucking do that shit. That's not me. So, but it did give me, again, like a feeling and a reality check. Like, bitch, this is where you are. And I've never experienced that before, and I'm never going to experience it again. I just won't be in that type of environment because I don't like it. It doesn't feel good. And it made me feel really uncomfortable. But again, I overcame it quickly, but I knew where I was. She made sure I knew where I was, and what I was doing was offending her, and she didn't like it. It was just really mean. And to know I never got a phone call from anyone from that gathering. They said they would call me, they never did. And maybe it was because I was talking to black people, but honestly, I didn't even care because I'm black, you know what I mean? And I'm not, I'm just not down with that shit. You know what I mean? Like, I like to talk to everybody. Everybody wanted to talk. So I'm like, I'm going to talk to everybody. And I've met some really great people there that I still know. So yeah, so I definitely understand that I think when white people see you with other blacks, they feel either outnumbered, or maybe she looked like she was betrayed or something. Like, she looked like I did something wrong to her. I'm just like, lady, like, you know, but I don't know. Maybe that's how they feel. I don't know. Now, I can't speak for all white people, just that one woman. But there's definitely still is like today, it's still here. Like, this racism cannot go away, and I just don't quite understand why. I'm going to finish up. It's been about 30 minutes. The courtesy mulattoes received from whites during the antebellum years would have translated into boundaries between blacks and mulattoes built into the structure of the antebellum system. This idea became mythologized in American culture as ideas about light-skinned mulatto house slaves are continuously contrasted with those about dark-skinned field slaves. However, as more and more mulattoes gained their freedom and even began to accrue a measure of economic status, both often with the assistance of white people, the boundary between blacks and mulattoes would have gained another dimension as mulattoes became increasingly associated with freedom and affluence and gained the autonomy to police the boundaries between themselves and black people without relying completely on preference from white people. Now, that's a lot. But basically what that is saying is that mulattoes or light-skinned blacks no longer needed white people to separate them from black people. They were doing it on their own. They were treating blacks less than them, completely on their own, without the push of their white counterpart, because that's what they were taught to do. In these ways, preference for whiteness would lead to the construction of antebellum boundaries that highlight and fortify inequality between blacks and mulattoes. Because these interactions centered on roles situated in the structure of slavery, field slave versus house slave, free versus slave, the power of the local slave economy may have played a vital role in facilitating the construction of boundaries and black mulatto inequality. Enslaved mulattoes received a number of advantages relative to their black counterparts. Because whites generally thought mulattoes were sharper, more aesthetically pleasing, and more capable of being civilized, they often offered these positions on house servants, away from the toils of fieldwork, and afforded them the opportunity to acquire trade skills and other education that they could use outside of the plantation. Moreover, they were given significantly more freedom to move throughout and off the plantation. You know, I think a lot of this had to do with the fact that there was white blood in, or they thought there was white blood in, or maybe they raped a black woman and they knew for sure that this child has white blood in them. And I think they would have felt guilty either because it was one of them or half of one of them. And again, they felt less threatened, or they felt like, oh, this black person has me in them, so they wouldn't kill me, or they wouldn't hurt me, or they wouldn't poison my food, or, you know, try to strangle me in my sleep or whatever, or drug me up, you know, because I'm sure that slaves did that back in the day because they were angry and they wanted to be free and they couldn't take it anymore, so they revolted in that way. And they might have felt like this person is less likely to do this. They just felt less threatened, which leads me to think back to that party I was talking about, why there were so many white people talking to me, and when I was talking to people of, you know, different colors, I was talking to people of all different black colors. It wasn't just like people that look like me. I was talking to all kinds of people, and they might have felt like, well, I thought I could trust you, nigga, but obviously I can't. I definitely understand that, and that's something I could relate to because of that one situation. But again, like I said, I don't put myself in those type of situations again because I don't like how that feels. Advantages on plantations fed into the advantages mulattoes accrued as free African Americans. Mulattoes were twice as likely to be manumitted as blacks, resulting in vast disparities in the number of free mulattoes and free blacks, and reflecting mulattoes' preferential status. In 1860, about 41% of free Southern African Americans were mulatto, while only about 10% of enslaved African Americans were mulatto. In the Deep South, the differences were even starker. In the Deep South, about 76% of free African Americans were mulatto, and only 9% of slaves were mulatto. In some places, the mulatto free population so greatly contrasted the black slave population, free black and mulatto almost became synonymous. Moreover, mulattoes leveraged their racial ancestry into economic favor from white people, which allowed them to capitalize on their freedom. The manumitted children of slave owner sexual liaisons were often given a financial head start by their white parent upon entering free society, or were able to use their white parents' social networks to gain economic advantages. As a result, mulattoes were disproportionately represented among prosperous freedmen and business-owning freedmen, and held significantly more wealth than blacks. In 1860, mulatto wealth was 50% of white wealth, while black wealth was only 20% of that of whites. The advantages afforded to mulattoes did not end with slavery. They persisted through Reconstruction up until the start of Jim Crow, when the census dropped the category altogether. Through the rest of the 19th century, mulattoes continued to enjoy greater occupational prestige, lower mortality rates, and lower child mortality rates. So that is it today. Go ahead and leave a comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me some of your stories and how you can relate to colorism. And, you know, colorism can only end when we look at people for who they are and stop looking at their skin color. Like, that's the only way that colorism will end between black people. Like, it's enough that there's racism against us. We don't need to be racist within our own community. I know that sometimes it's second nature, like again, my incident at Burger King, but I made sure to check myself and go, you know what? You could be overreacting. You don't even know why that girl's mad. You don't even know that girl. It just felt like that. You know what I mean? You know, when you get that feeling, you feel really strongly, but you could be wrong. So, you know, I just take those type of situations with a grain of salt and I keep it moving. But like online, I feel like people are really racist and colorist online. I see a lot of comments. I've made a few podcasts about colorism and skin color and hair color and how, you know, darker skinned women will say this about lighter skinned women, and there's like a war between dark and light skin. And it's like we should all just be who we are, you know. Honestly, mulattoes didn't ask to be mulattoes. You know, they were their parents were raped, and or for whatever reason they end up being mulatto, whether by choice or by force. That's what happened. So the children that turned into adults really had no control over what they look like. I mean, you could have a white and black parent and come out dark skinned. Like, there's really no determining what you're going to come out and look like. Black people are so diverse in how we look. There's no determining that. So I just feel like we all need to just love each other, and that's it. Like, it's just really, that's it. Just love each other and stop worrying about who's mulatto, who's mixed. Oh, I like your nose. You got good hair and all that other shit. It's just like, I'm just really happy that the world is being more conscious of colorism and we're learning about it, but I still think there's always a lot of work to do. Like, I still feel like colorism exists in the workplace offline. That's where it really exists, like at work. Like, you know, this article was about being in the workplace for the most part, or getting a house or going into a bank and getting a loan, you know, things like that. And how maybe dark-skinned people have to work 20 times as hard because people don't accept them as easily. But like I said, being a light-skinned woman, I have had my moments, so it is not easy breezy for me. I can say that I have not been treated special because I was light-skinned. There's always somebody lighter than me. I'm like in the middle, you know what I'm saying? There's always somebody darker than me and somebody lighter than me. I'm just the middle person. So, but I love my skin. I love who I am, and I hope you love who you are no matter what. This is just, you know, connecting the past with the current and just some education. I feel like if people are more aware and they know where it came from, they're less likely to do it, right? Have a good night, and thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe and share if you like this video.